My niece almost took my $1 billion orchard. But NASA's satellite images proved the truth. When I was a girl, we measured life by seasons. Spring meant muddy shoes and new blossoms. Summer meant freckles and long days of labor. Autumn was harvest and Thanksgiving. And winter was the slow breath before everything began again. Now, at 63, my life is still measured in seasons but on a grander scale. My name is Alice Montgomery, and I own the largest apple orchards in California. From the sky, my land looks like a quilt stitched in endless shades of green. When the sun strikes just right in the late afternoon, the rows of apple trees glow as if they've been painted with gold. The neighbors joke that my orchards could be seen from heaven, and maybe they can. I've been told by men with drones, little buzzing creatures they fly over my land without asking, that the sight of my farm is majestic. I prefer the word earned. These orchards didn't just appear. My grandparents planted the first saplings back in the 1920s when California was still wild with dust and promise. My father grew it, my mother tended it, and when the land passed to me, I worked harder than ever to make sure those roots dug deep enough to last generations. Now, between the land and the crops, my farm is valued at nearly $1 billion. I don't say that to boast. It is simply the truth. An empire of apples built row by row, season by season, year by year. The mornings are my favorite time. Before the workers arrive, before the machinery rumbles awake, I walk the rows alone. The air smells of dew and soil, and the apples hang heavy on the branches, fat with promise. I run my fingers across the bark like I might an old friend's shoulder. These trees have kept me company through heartbreak and celebration, through lean years and plentiful ones. They've watched me raise children, bury my husband, and grow old with more dignity than most people allow themselves. Drone footage, Lord, how I hate that word. Makes it look like I live in some fairy tale. Endless orchards bathed in golden light. A kingdom that stretches to the horizon. Reporters who've come out here to write their glossy magazine stories call me the Apple Queen of California. I don't care for the title, but I've learned not to correct people. They like their myths better than the truth. The truth is simpler. I am a farmer. My hands are rough from pruning shears. My knees ache from decades of crouching in the soil, and my face is browned by the same sun that feeds these trees. I may live in a house big enough to host 100 guests, but I still cook my supper in cast iron and keep quilts folded in the linen chest just in case a grandchild shows up unannounced. The men in suits, bankers, lawyers, investors, like to remind me of what this land is worth. They calculate numbers, wave documents under my nose, and whisper about selling. I smile politely and pour them iced tea, then send them on their way. They never understand. You can't put a price on soil that remembers the footsteps of your grandparents. You can't sell a horizon that your father once promised would belong to your children. This orchard isn't just money. It's memory, sweat, laughter, grief. Every tree has a story. There's one by the western fence line where my late husband carved our initials back when we were courting. Another row marks the year my first son was born. My father planted those himself to celebrate the new heir to the farm. And just beyond the main road stands the oldest apple tree we have, gnarled and stubborn, still producing after nearly a century. I tell the workers it's the soul of the orchard, and I believe that. Sometimes when the wind moves through the branches, it sounds like voices. My mother's urging me to trust the land. My father's warning me never to let anyone take it. They're gone now, but I feel them here, stitched into the roots. On harvest days, the land hums like a living creature. Crates fill with apples red as rubies, trucks line the dirt paths, and the air is sweet with fruit. We ship them across the country, even overseas. Some end up in school lunches, others in pies, others in champagne-colored cider bottles that fetch ridiculous prices in big city stores. No matter where they go, they all begin here, in this soil, in this sun. I stand at the edge of my land sometimes, hands on my hips, and think, this is mine. This will always be mine. And yet, beneath that thought, another voice stirs. A whisper I try not to listen to. Because as strong as these orchards are, as deep as their roots reach, there are always people who believe they have the right to take what others have built. Families are supposed to be safe places, honey. That's what I was raised to believe. Blood is thicker than water, my father used to say, and he said it like a warning, not just a proverb. But in my 63 years, I've learned something different. Sometimes it's your own blood that stains your hands the worst. Her name is Rachel Montgomery, my brother's daughter. She grew up running through these orchards just like I did. Shoes muddy, hair tangled, pockets stuffed with apples she'd swiped from the bins. I used to braid her hair on summer evenings while her parents worked in the packing shed. She called me Aunt Alice then, and she looked at me with the kind of wide-eyed trust only children have. That little girl is gone now. What stands in her place is a woman in high heels and silk blouses, a corporate lawyer with a taste for power. Rachel doesn't see apple trees anymore when she looks at this land. She sees dollar signs, stock options, boardrooms, and skyscrapers with her name etched on the glass. She once told me over Sunday supper, back when we were still speaking politely, that farmland ought to be managed like any other billion-dollar asset. She said it the way city people talk about oil or technology. I remember setting my fork down, staring at her across the table and asking, "What about roots? What about family?" She only smiled, tight and sharp, and said, "Roots are sentimental. Assets are real." That was when I realized she was no longer family in the way I understood the word. You see, Rachel believes she deserves this orchard. Not because she's worked it, not because she's tended to a single tree, but because she thinks I'm too old-fashioned, too stubborn, too well to me. She told someone once, I heard it through a cousin, that a billion-dollar orchard shouldn't be rotting in old hands. Old hands. Mine. Now Rachel is clever, I'll give her that. She knows she can't walk up to my front porch and demand the deed. So instead, she's chosen another path. A darker one. A scheme that reeks of ink and paper, not soil and sweat. Her plan, whispered through the halls of Sacramento law firms and carried out by men in suits who've never tasted a fresh-picked apple, is this. She intends to forge deeds. To create false documents that make it look as if I've willingly transferred ownership of this orchard to a corporation she controls. A shell, they call it. Such an ugly word, but fitting. A hollow corporation, all paper and shadow, built for one purpose. To steal what she cannot earn. Rachel's education makes her dangerous. She knows the language of contracts, the loopholes of property law, the soft spots in bureaucracies where corruption seeps in. She knows which notaries can be bought, which county clerks look the other way when the right hand shakes theirs. She thinks she's building a fortress of legality, brick by brick, that will stand even when I pound my fists against the courthouse door. But Rachel has forgotten something. Paper may look strong, but it burns. I first caught wind of her ambitions one afternoon when a neighbor, old Joe Ramirez, who has worked cattle land down the road for 50 years, mentioned seeing Rachel out here with a surveyor. Not once but 3 times. He asked me, "You sellin' part of the orchard, Alice?" I nearly dropped my pruning shears. Sell? To Rachel? Never. That night I lay awake in my bed, the air heavy with the smell of ripening apples. I thought about my grandparents' calloused hands, about my father's promises, about the century of labor in this soil. And then I thought about Rachel's smile, polished and practiced, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Chilled me more than the night air. Family betrayal is worse than any storm or drought. Storms pass. Droughts end. But betrayal, it rots from the inside. I wish I could say I underestimated her. But truth be told, I knew Rachel would try something one day. She's always been restless, always believed the orchard was wasted on me. I just didn't think she'd be bold enough to cross into criminal deceit. Forged deeds. Stolen land. A billion-dollar empire transferred into her greedy hands with the flick of a pen. It makes my stomach twist to think of it. But here's what Rachel doesn't know. This orchard has eyes and ears. The workers who've been with me for decades, the neighbors who walk these roads, the very soil that shifts beneath my feet. None of it will stay silent for long. She may believe her scheme is clever, invisible under the cover of polished legality. But shadows have a way of stretching in the wrong light. For now I keep my chin high and my eyes sharper. Rachel smiles when we meet at family gatherings, her lipstick red as the apples she covets, her words sugar sweet. But I hear the steel beneath them. She thinks she's ahead. She thinks I'm too old, too sentimental, too blind. She's wrong. Because you see, I've weathered more than greedy relatives in my life. I've stood against storms that flattened barns, against frosts that threatened entire harvests. I've buried a husband and raised children who wandered far from these fields. And through it all I've learned this. The orchard stands with those who stand for it. Rachel may have her paper, her lawyers, her forged deeds. But I have the land. And the land has a memory longer than any contract. And so, sweetheart, the game has begun. There's a certain stillness that belongs only to orchards at night. If you've never walked through rows of apple trees under a moonlit sky, you might think it's silent. But it isn't. The branches creak. Owls shift in their perches. Crickets sing their endless chorus. And the air, cool, damp, touched with sweetness, wraps around you like an old quilt. I've known that quiet all my life. And I can tell when something doesn't belong in it. The first sign was whispers. Not from the trees, no. From my workers. Good men and women who've been with me for decades, some nearly family by now. They don't rattle easy, but I could see it in their eyes, unease. One of them, Raphael, who's pruned these trees since he was a teenager, mentioned, almost in passing, that trucks had been moving down the dirt roads late at night. No logos. No permits. Just plain white trucks with their headlights dimmed, rumbling off toward the highway before dawn. I frowned, brushed it off at first. Probably someone hauling equipment, I told myself. But then I started listening closer. A crate left half empty in the packing shed. Tire tracks pressed into soft soil where no delivery should have been. Workers swearing they'd filled a bin full of apples one evening, only to find it mysteriously lighter by morning. Then there were the drones. At first I thought it was just kids from town fooling around with gadgets. But these weren't toys. No, these drones hovered with purpose, their red lights blinking in the night sky, sweeping across my trees like searchlights. I stood on the porch one evening, shawl wrapped tight against the chill, and watched one glide silently over the western orchard. Its camera lens glinted when it turned. It made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. I muttered out loud, "This land isn't yours to watch." My voice sounded too small against the dark. It didn't stop. A week later, I was in the kitchen, fixing myself a cup of chamomile tea, when I heard the low thrum. Not quite a plane, not quite a truck. I stepped outside barefoot, the porch boards cool under my toes, and there it was. Another drone, this one flying lower, scanning the southern rows. My apples, still heavy on the branches, gleamed under its artificial light. It was looking for something. Or perhaps it already knew what it was stealing. That was the night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, the house too quiet, the shadows too thick. I kept seeing those white trucks in my mind, their cargo beds filled with fruit that was supposed to go to market under my name. Fruit raised from my soil, watered with my sweat, carried away like it belonged to strangers. And though I tried to hush the thought, another whisper crawled into my mind. Rachel. Could it be her? My niece, sitting in some high-rise office, watching the orchard not with her eyes but through buzzing machines? Sending her people to strip me piece by piece as if I wouldn't notice? The thought made me sick. But it also made sense. One evening I decided to see for myself. I took the old Ford pickup, parked it by the east fence, and sat there in the dark with only the crickets for company. Hours passed. My eyelids drooped. I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. And then just after midnight I saw them. Headlights faint at first, creeping down the dirt road. 2 trucks. They stopped near the shed, and in the shadows I saw figures moving. Men lifting crates, stacking them onto the truck beds. Not clumsy, no. They moved fast, practiced like this wasn't their first time. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Every part of me wanted to storm down there, lantern in hand, and demand they drop my apples where they stood. But I didn't, because deep down I knew I needed more than anger. I needed proof. When the trucks rolled away, their taillights vanishing into the night, I sat there a long time. The orchard felt different around me, violated like a locked house that's been broken into. I whispered into the dark, "I won't let you take this from me." The next morning I tried to tell myself maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe they'd only taken a little. But when I walked the rows I saw it plain. Branches stripped bare, bins half-empty, tire tracks cutting ugly scars into the dirt. No, this wasn't a one-time theft. It was a system. A secret harvest, running parallel to mine, draining me under cover of darkness. I started locking the gates, setting lights along the main road. But the thefts didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. The whispers among my workers grew sharper, too. Raphael pulled me aside one morning, his face lined with worry, and said, "Senora Alice, this is not just thieves. This is organized." He was right. Organized, calculated, and aimed at me. Every night after that, I walked the porch with a flashlight in one hand, a shotgun in the other. The drone still buzzed, the trucks still came, and the orchard whispered to me in the dark, "Someone is stealing your life, Alice." And so the suspicion hardened into certainty. My orchard was under attack. Not from drought, not from blight, but from something colder, greed dressed up in law and shadows. And I knew, as sure as the sun would rise, that Rachel's fingerprints were somewhere on all of it. There comes a point when a woman has to admit she can't fight every battle on her own. I've been stubborn most of my life, still am if I'm honest, but even I knew this was bigger than one old farmer standing guard with a shotgun on her porch. Whoever was stealing from me wasn't just some opportunistic drifter. No, this was organized, deliberate, and polished with money behind it. And if I wanted to fight back, I'd need more than suspicion. I'd need eyes sharper than mine and proof stronger than my word. That's how I found myself in the company of Frank Delgado, a private investigator from Fresno with a reputation for being as stubborn as I am. He wasn't much younger than me, late 50s, with hair going silver at the temples and a voice roughened by too much black coffee. He'd worked theft cases for farms before, he told me, and he knew how slick these operations could be. When I first called him, I half expected a laugh. "Stolen apples," I imagined him saying. "Lady, I handle million-dollar wine scams, not orchard fruit." But instead he was quiet, listening. Then he said, "Mrs. Montgomery, if what you're describing is true, this isn't just a matter of stolen apples. This is industrial theft. And it sounds like you've got someone with deep pockets running the show." He came out the very next day, pulling up in a dusty sedan that looked as though it had seen every back road in California. We walked the orchard together, his eyes sharp, his hands tucked in his jacket pockets. He crouched to study the tire tracks, ran his fingers across the empty crates, and nodded toward the sky. "Drones, huh? That's surveillance, ma'am. Someone's planning these harvests like military operations." I felt a strange relief. Hearing another voice put shape to the fears that had kept me awake at night. That evening we sat at my kitchen table. I poured him coffee in my good stoneware mugs, the ones I usually save for company, and spread out my notes. I'd written down every date, every sound, every whisper I'd caught. He read through them slowly, nodding. "Good," he said. "You've got a timeline. That's more than most." Then he showed me his own tools. Lord, I didn't know drones came in so many shapes and sizes. He had small ones that could slip under tree canopies, larger ones with long lenses that could hover half a mile away. He even had heat-detecting cameras. "We'll catch them in the act," he promised. And catch them we did. The first night, I stayed on the porch while Frank set up his equipment at the south edge of the orchard. Around midnight, the familiar rumble came. Trucks moving slow down the dirt road. Through the drone's live feed, I saw it clear as daylight. Workers not mine but men in dark clothing, lifting apples by the crate, hauling them into unmarked trucks. They moved quick, practiced like ants stripping sugar. I felt sick to my stomach watching it. Those apples, they were supposed to go to schools, to markets, to families who trusted the Montgomery name. Instead, they were being smuggled into the night. Frank didn't flinch. He zoomed in, captured license plates, marked the timestamp. "We've got him," he muttered. "This isn't kids joyriding, Mrs. Montgomery. This is theft on an industrial scale." He wasn't done. Over the next week, he deployed more drones, covering every quadrant of my land. The footage piled up: nighttime harvests, workers climbing trees with headlamps, forklifts loading crates. Some trucks carried fake farm names stenciled on their sides. Others bore no markings at all. And always the drones hovering above, scanning like vultures. One night, the footage even caught a familiar face. One of Rachel's old college friends. A lawyer who had no business near an orchard. He was there, clipboard in hand, directing the workers like a foreman. When Frank showed me that clip, my heart sank. The whispers in my head about Rachel weren't just paranoia. She was behind it. "Proof," Frank said, tapping the screen. "This'll hold up anywhere. Court, FBI, you name it." But he cautioned me too. "Mrs. Montgomery, people who run schemes like this don't back down easy. They've got lawyers, money, and arrogance on their side. They'll try to bury you in paper if they can't bury you in fear. You need to be ready." I nodded. I was ready. There was a moment late one night when Frank and I stood by the edge of the orchard, watching his drone blink against the stars. The trucks were rumbling off again, heavy with stolen fruit. I whispered, "They think I won't fight back. They think I'm too old." Frank looked at me, his face solemn in the moonlight. "They don't know who they're dealing with." And I believed him. The orchard was no longer quiet at night, no longer a place of peace. But now at least I wasn't blind. I had proof. I had a partner. And I had a fire in me that no thief could extinguish. This land was mine, and I was going to fight for it. If there's one thing I've learned in my years on this earth, it's that thieves don't always come through the back door. Sometimes they walk straight through the courthouse, smiling, with a stack of papers in hand. I thought the trucks and drones were bad enough. But what came next chilled me deeper than any stolen crate of apples. Rachel, my own niece, the girl whose hair I once braided on summer evenings, filed papers claiming that my orchard no longer belonged to me. It began with a letter. Thick envelope, crisp paper, full of the kind of language only lawyers use. Notice of transfer of ownership. I sat at my kitchen table, my coffee growing cold, and read the words over and over until they blurred. According to the documents, I had signed over my land, every tree, every acre, to a corporation I'd never heard of. The signature at the bottom looked like mine, but it wasn't. I knew my hand, my loops, my strokes. This was an imitation, slick and practiced, but false. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. As if anyone who knows me would believe I'd hand over $1 billion orchard without so much as a conversation. But the more I read, the less funny it became. The documents weren't just forged. They were notarized, stamped, and filed with the county clerk. They looked official, airtight, unshakable. That night I barely slept. I sat in the den with the papers spread out before me, the lamplight making the ink gleam. Rachel had taken her theft out of the shadows and planted it in plain sight. No more sneaking trucks, no more buzzing drones. Now she was using the system itself to rob me, dressing her lies in the costume of the law. The next morning, I met with Frank, my investigator, at the diner in town. I slid the papers across the table to him. He didn't even touch his coffee before he leaned back, whistling low. "This is dangerous," he said. "With documents like these, they can freeze your accounts, lock your shipments, even throw you off your own land if a judge believes it." And that's exactly what Rachel's team intended. Within a week, I received notice of an emergency hearing. Her lawyers, slick men in tailored suits, claimed urgent action was needed to protect the corporation's assets from my interference. They painted me as a confused old woman, clinging to land I no longer owned. It made my blood boil. I dressed carefully for that hearing. Navy skirt, white blouse, hair pulled back. Not fancy but strong. I wanted them to see me as I was. Not frail, not confused, but the rightful owner of every acre of those orchards. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and cold air conditioning. Rachel sat near the front, her hair sleek, her lipstick the color of blood. She didn't look at me when I entered, just whispered to her lawyers. They presented the forged deeds like holy scripture, sliding them across to the judge with practiced confidence. Stamped, signed, sealed. On the surface it was perfect. "Mrs. Montgomery," one of them said, turning toward me with a smile too sharp to be polite. "Did you or did you not sign these documents transferring ownership of your orchards?" "I did not," I said firmly. "Then how?" he pressed. "Do you explain your signature?" I leaned forward, looking the judge straight in the eye. "The way I explain it, Your Honor, is that my niece is trying to steal the land my family has tended for 100 years. And she's willing to forge my name to do it." There was a murmur in the gallery. Rachel shifted in her seat, just barely, but I saw it. A flicker of unease. But the lawyers pressed harder. They spoke of chain of title, corporate restructuring, fiduciary responsibility. They buried the truth under mountains of legal jargon. And for a moment I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Because no matter how wrong it was, on paper their lies looked like the truth. When the hearing ended, the judge didn't rule immediately. He said he'd need time to review the evidence. But I could tell from his face, he wasn't sure who to believe. And that terrified me. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt smaller than I ever had. The sun was hot, the air dry, but I shivered. For the first time, I understood the true power of Rachel's scheme. She wasn't just stealing apples in the dark anymore. She was trying to erase me from my own land with nothing but ink and paper. That evening, I sat on the porch, the orchard stretching quiet and golden before me. I thought of my grandparents, my parents, my husband. What would they say if they saw this? I could almost hear my father's voice. "Don't you dare give up, Alice." And I won't. The paper trap may look tight, but paper burns. And I had no intention of letting Rachel's lies choke the life out of what generations had built. It's a funny thing, honey. Paper may look strong, but the truth has a way of leaking through the cracks. Rachel's lawyers strutted into that courtroom with their stamps and signatures, but they didn't count on something stronger than their paper fortress: persistence. Frank, my investigator, didn't stop at capturing footage of the nighttime thefts. He dug deeper. And the deeper he went, the uglier it became. One evening, he came to the farm carrying a folder so thick it barely fit under his arm. He spread it across my kitchen table, pushing aside my teacup to make room. "Take a look at this," he said, his voice tight. Inside were photos, apples being sold in crates that bore no Montgomery labels. They weren't in our distribution network either. No, these were showing up in markets I'd never shipped to, sold under phony brand names. Even worse, they were being dumped on the black market in Mexico and Asia, sold cheap and fast. My apples, stripped of their name and worth, trafficked like stolen jewelry. I felt sick to my stomach. All the years of care, watering schedules, pruning, labor, harvest timing reduced to contraband. My apples were feeding criminals instead of families. Frank wasn't finished. He tapped another set of papers. I had a digital team trace the corporation Rachel set up. You know what we found? I shook my head, bracing myself. Shell companies. Dozens of them. All routed through places like the Cayman Islands, Panama, even Cyprus. And guess who the beneficiary is? I swallowed hard. Rachel. He nodded. Rachel. And not just her. She's tied to international produce traders. People who make fortunes moving stolen crops, counterfeit wine, even mislabeled beef. This isn't just about you, Mrs. Montgomery. She's plugged herself into a global network. I leaned back in my chair, my breath caught in my chest. My niece, my brother's daughter, wasn't just greedy. She was dangerous. And then came the break that made me believe maybe, just maybe, the orchard itself was fighting back. A shipment of apples was seized at the port of Los Angeles. Customs flagged it for irregular paperwork, and when they cracked open the crates, what did they find? Montgomery apples, still in bins that bore faint traces of our mark. Someone had tried to scrub it off, but the inspectors weren't fools. They traced the cargo back to Rachel's Shell Corporation. Proof, Frank said, his eyes gleaming. Not just theft, but fraud on an international scale. I wanted to cheer, but I didn't. Because I knew Rachel would fight tooth and nail. For every crack in her plan, she had 3 more lies ready to plaster over it. Still, hope had returned. At the orchard, the workers started to notice too. Senora Alice, Raphael said one morning, I saw your apples at a stand in Fresno. But the sign said they were from Golden West Produce. That's not you, is it? I shook my head. No, it's not me. His jaw tightened. Then it's theft. And they're not even ashamed of it. Word spread fast. Other farmers started calling me, saying they'd seen my apples sold under fake names. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was a scandal waiting to erupt. Rachel must have sensed it too. At the next hearing, her smile was thinner. Her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her lawyers spoke louder, faster, desperate to drown out the mounting evidence. They claimed the seized shipment was a clerical error. They argued that the shell corporations were common practice. But I could see the cracks widening. The judge leaned forward more often, frowning. Reporters started showing up in the back rows, scribbling notes. One afternoon, after a long day in court, I stood by the orchard fence and looked at the rows glowing in the setting sun. The trees seemed stronger somehow, as if they knew the truth was on its way out. I thought of my grandparents, who planted the first saplings with nothing but hope in calloused hands. I thought of my husband, who once told me that land will always side with those who love it. And I thought of Rachel, my niece, who had traded her roots for greed. Frank joined me by the fence, his folder tucked under one arm. We've got her, Alice, he said softly. Not all the way yet, but the cracks are spreading. Keep standing. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. This orchard has stood for 100 years. I'll stand as long as it takes. The wind shifted then, carrying the smell of ripe apples, sweet and defiant. And for the first time in weeks I felt steady. Rachel might have her forged papers and her high-rise offices, but I had the land, the truth, and a growing pile of evidence. And sweetheart, let me tell you, no matter how clever the scheme, lies cannot stand forever. Not when the orchard itself refuses to bow. I've always trusted my eyes. A farmer has to. You learn to read the sky, the soil, the leaves. You see when a tree is thirsty, when a frost is coming, when a storm will break before the weatherman ever mentions it. But this fight I'd been dragged into, it was bigger than what I could see standing on my porch. My eyes weren't enough anymore. That was when Frank, my investigator, mentioned something that changed everything. Mrs. Montgomery, he said one afternoon, spreading his papers across my kitchen table. We need another angle. Something they can't deny, can't twist. Have you ever heard of NASA's open-source satellite data? I laughed softly. I know NASA puts men on the moon, Frank, but I never thought they'd help me fight apple thieves. But he was serious. He explained that NASA's satellites don't just watch the stars, they look down at us too. High-resolution images of farmland, water movement, even the faint heat of trucks moving at night. All of it publicly available if you knew where to dig. So dig we did. Frank brought his laptop and set it on the table, the screen glowing in the dim light of my kitchen. I sat beside him, my heart beating faster than I cared to admit. He pulled up a map, zooming down until California filled the screen. Then the valley, then my orchard, my rows, my soil, my trees. And there it was. Not the glossy green of a summer morning. Not the golden sweep of evening light. But a night image captured in heat signatures. The orchard lay dark and cool, except for lines of glowing shapes. Trucks crawling slowly along the dirt roads like fireflies in formation. My breath caught. "Those are mine," I whispered. "My roads. My orchard." Frank clicked again and the timestamp appeared. 2:07 a.m. A night I remembered clearly. That was the morning I'd walked out barefoot onto the porch, hearing the trucks in the distance but unable to prove it. And here it was, burned into satellite memory. The trucks had been real. The theft had been real. We scrolled through more. Midnight. 1 a.m. 4 in the morning. Each time the images showed the same. Clusters of heat where no one should have been, the glow of machinery, the steady flow of stolen apples leaving my land under the cover of night. I felt something deep in my chest then, something between sorrow and vindication. All those sleepless nights, all those whispers from my workers, all my suspicions, etched here in light from hundreds of miles above. "Do you see this?" Frank said, leaning closer. His finger traced a glowing line across the screen. "This truck leaves here." He tapped the western edge of the orchard. "At exactly the same time we caught them on drone footage." He clicked again, lining up the two feeds side by side. Perfect match. Ground and sky, both telling the same story. I sat back, tears stinging my eyes. Not tears of weakness but of relief. The orchard hadn't lied to me. The land had been whispering its truth all along. And now the heavens themselves had written it down. We spent hours that evening combing through the archives. Each stolen night had its witness. Glowing signatures against the cool earth, time-stamped down to the minute. It was almost eerie how precise it was. One image showed workers with portable floodlights, their glow spilling over the rows. Another captured the heat of forklifts clustered around the sheds. Each one felt like a nail hammered into Rachel's coffin of lies. At one point I asked softly, "Frank, can anyone deny this? Can they twist it like they twisted those papers?" He shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am. This isn't rumor or suspicion. It's science. It's raw data. You don't argue with the sky." That night after Frank left, I stood on my porch and looked up. The stars glittered, steady and cold. Somewhere up there, silent satellites circled, their lenses turned toward Earth, capturing truths too large for human lies to erase. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and whispered, "Thank you." Because I knew then I wasn't fighting alone. The orchard had my back, yes, but so did the very heavens. Rachel could forge papers by notaries, hire men to strip my land in the dark. But she couldn't silence the satellites. She couldn't forge the sky. The next morning, when Raphael asked me why I looked so calm, I told him simply, "Because the orchard has found its witness." And sweetheart, that was the truth. The orchard had always kept its secrets close. But now, thanks to NASA's silent watchers, its story was written across the stars, stamped with time, and ready to speak louder than Rachel ever could. There are moments in life when silence is louder than thunder. The courtroom that morning was packed shoulder to shoulder, the air heavy with whispers and perfume. Reporters lined the back rows, their pens ready, cameras hidden under jackets. Farmers from the valley had come too, some out of loyalty, some out of curiosity, all of them waiting to see if the Apple Queen of California would be dethroned. And there she sat, Rachel. My niece. My brother's child. She looked sharp as a blade in a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back so tightly it gleamed. She didn't glance my way. Instead, she whispered with her lawyers, flipping through folders as though this were just another case. Another courtroom, another conquest. I sat straighter in my chair, my hands folded on my lap. I'd chosen my outfit carefully that morning. A simple dress the color of ripe wheat, pearls my mother left me, and my wedding band. Not wealth, not vanity, just roots. I wanted them to see me not as an asset to be stripped, but as a woman who had worked this land with her own hands. Rachel's lawyers struck first. They strode to the bench with forged deeds in hand, their voices smooth as butter. They talked of chain of title and corporate transfer. They painted me as a confused old woman who had signed away her empire without realizing it. They leaned hard on their paperwork, waving notarized signatures and corporate seals. For a while I could feel the tide pressing against me. The judge leaned forward, frowning at the documents. The gallery murmured. Rachel's lips curved in the faintest smile, as if she could already taste victory. Then it was our turn. Frank rose slowly, calm as a man who knows the truth is on his side. He didn't start with speeches or accusations. Instead, he carried a small projector to the front and set it up with steady hands. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to show you what really happened to Mrs. Montgomery's orchard." The lights dimmed, and the first drone video flickered onto the screen. Grainy but clear, it showed workers in dark clothing stripping apples at midnight, forklifts moving bins into unmarked trucks. Gasps rippled through the room. A woman near the front clutched her husband's arm. Rachel's lead attorney sprang to his feet. "Objection! This footage could have been fabricated. We don't know the source." Frank didn't argue. He simply nodded, as if expecting it. "That's fine. Let's bring in the second witness." He clicked and the screen changed. This time it wasn't grainy night footage. It was the cold, undeniable clarity of satellite images. My orchard stretched across the screen like a quilt, dark and cool under the night sky. Except for the glowing trails of trucks, moving down dirt roads at the exact same hours as the drone footage. Each image was stamped with time, date, and coordinates. The silence was absolute. You could hear the judge's pen scratch against the desk as he leaned in, studying the screen. Frank's voice cut through the hush. "Your Honor, this is NASA satellite data. Publicly available. Independent. These heat signatures show movement of trucks and equipment in Mrs. Montgomery's orchard during hours when no legal harvesting could have occurred. Here," he clicked again, "is 2:07 a.m. on August 14th. Note the cluster of trucks leaving the western road." Another click. "Here's the same timestamp from the drone. Identical movements, identical timing. 2 witnesses, one from Earth, one from the heavens." A murmur rose from the gallery, shock, disbelief, anger. A reporter dropped his pen. Somewhere in the back someone whispered, "Lord have mercy." I kept my eyes on Rachel. For the first time she faltered. Her face, so carefully composed, blanched. Her lips tightened. And when she finally looked at me, it wasn't with contempt, it was with fear. Frank didn't stop there. He laid the images side by side, night after night, building a wall of truth no paper could topple. Each one showed the theft in progress, the orchard glowing under the watchful eye of the sky. The judge cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. "Miss Montgomery, do you have any explanation for this imagery?" Rachel's lawyer stammered something about data misinterpretation and privacy concerns. But it sounded hollow even to their own ears. The judge's frown deepened. In that silence something shifted. The orchard's truth, long hidden in whispers and shadows, had finally spoken aloud. Not in my voice, not in Frank's, but in the cold, impartial testimony of the stars themselves. When the lights came back on, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Not victory yet, not final, but a turning. The room had seen the truth, and the truth had power. I sat quietly, my hands still folded, my pearls cool against my skin. And I thought of my father, who once told me, "Alice, the land never lies. People do. But the land never." He was right. The orchard had borne witness, and the sky had delivered its testimony. Rachel looked down at her papers, her hands trembling ever so slightly. And I knew, as surely as I knew the seasons, that her empire of lies was beginning to crumble. The courtroom was never the same after that day. Once the NASA images lit up the walls, once the orchard's truth was stamped in time and light, the silence broke into a storm that could not be hushed. The judge ruled swiftly. He leaned forward, his hands folded, his voice steady but firm. The deeds presented by the defense are fraudulent. This court recognizes Alice Montgomery as the sole legal owner of the orchards. Effective immediately, the forged transfers are void. The gavel struck, sharp as an axe splitting wood. For a heartbeat I sat frozen. Then the sound sank in, and I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. Around me people gasped, whispered, shifted. Some even clapped before the bailiff hushed them. Rachel didn't move. Her lawyers scrambled, papers flying, muttering about appeals and procedure. But she sat stiff, her eyes locked on the judge as if she could stare him into changing his mind. She looked less like the polished attorney she'd fashioned herself into and more like a child caught red-handed. I wish I could tell you I felt triumph. But what I felt was something heavier. A sorrow, deep and aching, for the niece I had once braided hair for. The little girl who had run through my orchard with sticky hands and a laugh like wind chimes. She had traded her roots for greed. And now the bill had come due. The fallout spread faster than wildfire. Within days, the FBI launched a probe into Rachel's shell corporations. Reporters dug up everything, her offshore accounts, her ties to international produce smugglers, even the customs seizure at the port of Los Angeles. Headlines blared across the country. The billion-dollar orchard heist. Neighbors who once spoke Rachel's name with pride now shook their heads in shame. Old friends of hers gave interviews saying they weren't surprised, not really. Ambition like that, one said on the evening news, it always ends in fire. As for me, I couldn't leave the orchard those first few days. I walked the rows morning and night, my hand brushing the branches, whispering thanks. The trees had stood with me. The land had spoken. And the skies had carried the truth when no one else would. Raphael came to me one evening, his hat in his hands. "Senora Alice," he said softly, "it is over now." I looked out across the fields, the sun setting in ribbons of orange and gold. For her, maybe, but not for us. We still have work to do. And we did. Lawyers for the state came through asking questions, copying records. The FBI took statements, photographed crates, traced bank wires. The orchard became not just a farm but a crime scene. A story too big to ignore. Rachel tried to fight, of course. She filed motions, accused me of manipulation, even claimed the imagery was fake. But the harder she fought, the deeper she sank. Each lie uncovered another. Each forged signature exposed another fraud. And soon, even her lawyers began to back away, unwilling to sink with her ship. The last time I saw her, she was being led out of the courthouse by agents in dark suits. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted her name, and she turned her face away. For a moment I caught her profile, hard and unyielding, and I wondered if she felt any regret at all. I don't know the answer. Maybe I never will. What I do know is this. The orchard is mine. Still standing. Still breathing. Still ours. And the name Montgomery, though she tried to stain it, remains bound to these rows, these roots, this soil. Not as a corporate asset. Not as a line item on a balance sheet. But as a legacy. That night, when the farm grew quiet again, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The stars shimmered overhead, silent witnesses to all that had passed. I whispered into the dark, "It's over." And for the first time in a long while I believed it. The orchard stands. That's what I tell myself each morning as I walk the rows. The sun just rising, the trees dressed in gold. The orchard stands, and so do I. Rachel's schemes are ashes now. The courts have spoken, the FBI has their files, and the world has seen what greed tried to do here. But I don't linger on her name anymore. I turn back to the land, to the work that never ends, to the harvests yet to come. I've begun something new. The Farmland Protection Trust. My lawyers are helping me put it in place. A shield for farmers like me who've poured their lives into their soil, only to have it threatened by paper tricks and corporate hunger. This orchard will be the first cornerstone. No forged deed, no crooked notary. No greedy hand will ever tear it from its roots again. Sometimes when the evening light spreads across the fields, I think of my parents, my grandparents, my husband. I feel them here. And I think of the children and grandchildren yet to come, who may one day run these rows with sticky fingers and laughter in the air. They will inherit not just land but strength. One last time, Frank flew his drone high above the trees. The footage showed the orchard at sunrise, endless rows glowing untouchable. Watching it, I smiled. Not as a queen, not as a fighter, but simply as a woman who kept her promise to guard the land entrusted to her. The orchard stands. It always will. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.